Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are attempting a synthesis of, well, staggering complexity. We're delving into the anthropological, social, and demographic profile of India.
It's a huge topic. I mean, you're talking about a nation that historically and structurally contains more diversity and philosophical density than almost anywhere else on Earth.
Exactly. The sources we have are incredibly rich. They map everything from ancient linguistic families and these really failed colonial-era race theories,
Right.
all the way to deep social philosophies and the enduring challenge of caste and tribal identity.
It is an immense undertaking, and I think to really appreciate the systems we're about to unpack, we have to start with the scale.
The numbers.
The sheer numbers, they're just shocking. As of the 2017 World Population Prospects, India's population stood at 1.34 billion people. That's the container, you could say.
But it's what's inside the container that matters, the identity marker.
That's what defines the challenge.
Absolutely. And when you talk about identity, the first most obvious division is language. The sources cite the People's Linguistic Survey of India, the PLSI, which confirms an astonishing 780 different languages are spoken across the country.
780.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to comprehend. And that's exactly why you need anthropological tools just to even set the stage, just to begin to understand it.
So that's our mission in this deep dive, to synthesize these core concepts and to give you a shortcut to understanding the foundational elements of this great social tapestry.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Part one, mapping identity. We'll start with languages and then get into those early racial theories you mentioned.
It's good.
So when we visualize India's linguistic landscape, it isn't random at all. It's actually categorized into 4 major families. If you saw it on a map, it would look like 4 distinct zones of communication.
We're calling these the 4 pillars. Can you walk us through them?
Certainly. First, and the largest, is the Aryan family. This one dominates the northern and central plains of India. Second, you have the Dravidian family, which is primarily located in the south. Then third, there's the Austroasiatic family.
Which anthropologically is sometimes referred to as Nishada.
Exactly. You find that largely among tribal groups in central and eastern regions. And finally, the Sino-Tibetan family, or Kirata, which is concentrated, as you'd expect, in the Himalayan and northeast regions.
Looking at the data, the dominance of one of these families it's just overwhelming.
It really is.
Something like 73% of Indians speak languages belonging to that Aryan family, specifically the Indo-Aryan branch.
And within that massive group, you have Hindi.
Right. The sources say Hindi is the mother tongue of 44% of Indians, making it by far the most widely spoken language.
That numerical dominance, though, it often obscures the deep, deep historical roots of the other families.
Especially the Dravidian family.
Exactly. It's spoken by about 20% of Indians. And here's the key thing. The Dravidian languages are considered archaeologically and historically older than the Aryan languages. They carry an incredibly rich history.
And the sources really highlight the cultural wealth there by mentioning their 4 classical languages. These are languages that the government has recognized for their antiquity, their independent tradition.
That's right. And these are, first, Telugu, which is actually the most spoken Dravidian language today, not Tamil, as some might think.
Interesting.
Then you have Tamil, with its vast ancient literary canon, and then Malayalam and Kannada. These 4 languages have a literary heritage that predates many, many European linguistic traditions.
But the sources bring up a crucial and honestly an alarming detail from that same PLSI survey.
The extinction threat.
Yes. With 780 languages, the system is so rich, but it says around 400 of them are actively facing extinction.
That's nearly half.
Half the linguistic heritage of the country is under threat. It means preservation isn't just about culture, it's about saving unique forms of human thought, of communication.
It really shifts the conservation discussion, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're not just conserving monuments, you're trying to conserve entire intellectual frameworks that are embedded within a language.
Absolutely.
So moving on from language, which is, a fluid and changing form of identity, let's pivot to the attempts to establish a rigid, static identity.
Based on physical measurements.
Yes, the historical racial classifications.
This is where we really get into the intellectual context of the colonial era. The first major system we encounter, and it's a highly controversial one, is H.H. Risley's 7-fold classification from 1915.
Right, he was part of the British establishment, and his whole system was based on these so-called anthropometric measurements.
What exactly did that entail?
Well, Risley's methodology relied very heavily on quantifying physical differences. He used 9 different measurements, but the one metric that dictated his entire classification, the one he was obsessed with, was the nasal index,
The nasal index.
the ratio of the breadth of the nose to its length.
Yeah.
He genuinely believed this was a reliable, fixed marker of racial purity and origin.
It seems so arbitrary. Can you give us a snapshot of the types he created based on just this one index?
He did. He used this index to deduce people's origins. So he classified those with a low nasal index, which means a long, narrow nose, as the pure Indo-Aryan type.
And who did he put in that category?
He associated this type with tall stature and long heads, and his examples included Kashmiri Brahmins and the Khatris.
Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum. What about the other?
Conversely, those with the highest nasal index, so a broad, short nose, were classified as the Dravidian type.
And his examples for that group?
Groups like the Panians of Malabar. He described them as having short stature, a dark complexion, and a long head. He even created these hybrid categories like the Scytho-Dravidian, which he said had medium features, and he put groups like the Marathas in there.
But the real danger, as the sources point out, wasn't just this strange fixation on the nose.
No.
It was the sweeping social deduction he drew from these completely flawed measurements.
Precisely. That's the critical point. Risley used this biological framework to justify a social structure. He controversially asserted that the highest castes were associated with the pure Indo-Aryan race.
The narrow nose.
The narrow nose, and the lowest castes were associated with the Dravidian race, the broader nose. It was an explicit, pseudoscientific attempt to give the social hierarchy of caste a racial basis.
So after Risley, the next big attempt at this kind of classification was B.S. Guha's six-fold system. This was for the 1931 census.
Right. Guha's system was an effort to be a bit more sophisticated, to incorporate more global anthropological ideas into the Indian context.
It was more complex. He had 6 primary types: Negrito, Proto-Australoid, Mongoloid, Mediterranean, Western brachycephals, and Nordic. It looks like he was trying to map global migration patterns onto the subcontinent.
He was. Let's just pull out 2 specific examples from his work just to show the level of detail he was going for.
Okay.
First, we can look at the Negrito type. Guha described them as having short stature, frizzly hair, and a broad nose. You'd see this type, he argued, in some South Indian tribes like the Kedar.
And another one.
Then there's the Mongoloid type, which he said was predominant in the sub-Himalayan regions. They were characterized by short to medium stature, a flat face, and that specific physical feature known as the epicanthic fold.
Okay, so you see that in communities like the Sima Nagas or Tibetans of Bhutan.
Exactly. Guha was trying to create this very detailed physical taxonomy.
But the true aha moment, the critical piece of insight that just reframes this entire section, requires us to leap forward in time nearly 70 years to the dawn of genomic science.
And this is the definitive rebuttal. This just dismantles all of these classification systems.
The Human Genome Project.
Yes. The report in 2001, a landmark study, concluded that all humans are genetically similar by an astonishing 99.99%.
99.9%.
Right. That minute variation of 0.01% is simply utterly insufficient to support the rigid, multi-layered racial taxonomies that people like Risley and Guha were trying to build based on a nose measurement.
So these systems, even though they were historically influential and sadly used to justify social hierarchy, they're now viewed by modern science as just artifacts, relics of colonial-era thought. They illustrate historical, intellectual approaches, not biological realities.
And that's a powerful lesson in how scientific understanding evolves. So now that we've addressed those physical and linguistic markers, we can transition to the internal, the enduring structures of identity.
This is where we get to the philosophy.
Yes, we move into part 2, the philosophical framework of Indian social life. If you think of the society as this incredibly complex building, this section is all about the blueprints.
And the first concept on the blueprint is Purushartha.
Purushartha. It's the philosophical orientation that really sets the moral compass for Hindu life.
So it refers to the 4 goals or aims that are supposed to define human existence.
Right, and they're all oriented toward achieving harmony in this life and ultimately salvation or moksha. It dictates what a life well lived should actually entail.
Let's detail these 4 pillars because they're meant to be experienced sequentially and in harmony with each other.
Okay, so first there is dharma. This is the ethical core. It covers your rights, your duties, your privileges. Your dharma is often contextual. It changes based on your role, your family position, your stage of life. It's the moral law that guides action.
Okay, so that's the foundation. What's second?
Second is artha. This is the pursuit of wealth, material well-being, economic activity. Philosophy doesn't reject material success at all.
In fact, it sees it as vital.
It does. But here's the key qualifier, and the sources really emphasize this. Artha must be acquired by righteous means. It has to be guided by Dharma, and it should be used primarily to fulfill social and familial obligations.
So it's not wealth for wealth's sake.
Not at all. Third, we have Kama. This represents the instinctive and emotional life, the satisfaction of desires, including aesthetics, sensory pleasure, and sexual urges. It recognizes the fundamental human need for enjoyment and for emotional fulfillment.
And the final goal, the one that gives meaning to the other three, is moksha.
Moksha. This is the ultimate aim. The realization of inner spirituality, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, and that final return to the source of being.
The essential insight here, and what makes this system so ingenious, is the concept of balance.
The balance is everything. Artha, wealth, and Kama, desire, are not treated as spiritual liabilities or as sins.
Well, they're seen as fundamental human nature.
Exactly. And the job of Dharma is to act as the ethical governor, the regulator, ensuring that the pursuit of wealth and pleasure doesn't become excessive or violate moral codes. Without Dharma securing them, the pursuit of Artha and Kama leads to societal disharmony.
This whole quest for harmony is then linked to the concept of varnashrama.
Varnashrama attempts to organize the ideal social structure by combining the 4 varnas, the occupational groups, with the 4 ashramas, or stages of life.
Let's focus on those 4 stages, the ashramas, because they provide the chronological roadmap for a life that is pursuing purushartha.
Okay, the 4 ashramas begin with brahmacharya. This is the student stage.
So a period dedicated entirely to formal education, spiritual learning,
and characterized by rigorous discipline and celibacy. The focus is purely on acquiring knowledge.
After that, upon marriage, the individual enters the next stage.
Grihastha, the householder stage. This is the period of maximum social engagement. Here, the individual is responsible for earning a living, supporting a family, raising children, and fulfilling all of their social obligations.
And this is the stage where Artha, Dharma, and Kama are all actively and fully engaged.
All at once. It's the busiest stage. Then comes the stage of gradual withdrawal, vanaprastha, which is the hermit stage.
So the individual begins to renounce worldly desires and retreats, either metaphorically or literally.
Right, into a forest. Or they just dedicate their time fully to religious and spiritual pursuits. They're preparing for that final separation.
And the culmination of it all is sannyasa, the ascetic stage.
Total detachment from the material world. You abandon all responsibilities, and your sole focus is on attaining moksha, merging with the divine.
But this is where the philosophical ideal really confronts modern reality. The sources highlight a really profound contemporary insight. The grihastha, or householder stage, is the most dominant and often the only fully lived stage today.
It is. Vanaprastha and sannyasa are now either heavily compressed into a very short retirement, or they're largely abandoned by the majority of the population.
That structural shift has a massive implication for the whole Purushartha system, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because if grihastha is where Artha and Kama are the primary drivers, and the stages dedicated to detachment are neglected,
then the whole philosophical system gets rewired. It goes unbalanced.
The sources suggest this imbalance where wealth and desire dominate and the ethical governor of Dharma is weakened because there's no reflective withdrawal is seen as a root cause of a lot of contemporary social and psychological suffering.
The system was designed to have a life cycle safety valve. And when that valve is removed, the pressure of material ambition just mounts and mounts.
It's a fascinating synthesis of history in modern sociology. Now let's look at one more philosophical anchor for social life. Rina, the concept of debt.
Rina. This provides the moral obligation framework. The idea is that every individual, just by existing within the social and cosmic order, is born with inherent social debts.
And these debts have to be consciously and continuously repaid throughout your life.
Right. Repayment is a prerequisite for achieving moksha and for maintaining harmony.
Let's detail the 4 primary types of Rina. They tell us exactly what the society values and who we ought allegiance to.
First, there's Devarina. This is the debt to the deities, to the divine. It's repaid through daily rituals, prayers, and sacrifices. It's an acknowledgement of the divine source of existence.
Okay, second.
Second is Rishi Rina. This is the debt owed to the sages, the teachers, to knowledge itself.
And how do you repay that?
By diligently learning, preserving, and sharing that knowledge. And it often involves providing guru dashina, a reciprocal offering to one's teacher, at the end of your education. It validates the importance of intellectual heritage.
Third, and this one is crucial for social continuity, is putrarina.
The debt owed to your ancestors and your lineage. This is repaid primarily through procreation, having children to ensure the family line continues, and by performing familial traditions, like the Pingdalanan rituals, which honor the deceased.
And the fourth is Atithi Rina.
The debt to guests and to humanity at large. This debt requires you to treat guests, whether they are planned or unexpected, with reverence and generosity. It emphasizes hospitality and social connection beyond your immediate family.
And the sources also note that this concept can be extended.
It can, to include Buddharina, which is the debt owed to the entire realm of living beings, plants and animals. This debt is repaid by demonstrating non-cruelty and care towards the natural world.
It's clear that Rina, especially the ancient Triarina, the first three debts, provides this powerful moral anchor. It reminds individuals that their existence isn't purely autonomous.
No, it's deeply connected to family, to teachers, and to the divine. Without fulfilling these obligations, especially during that busy grahasta stage, one cannot advance spiritually. It establishes a perpetually reciprocal society.
Okay, so if the Purushartha and Rina were the philosophical blueprints, then the structure that's built upon them is the caste system. We now enter part 3, the structure and dynamics of the caste system.
This is a really complex topic, and it requires some careful definition right at the start. The word caste itself comes from the Portuguese word casta, which means stratification based on color, creed, or blood.
But the critical academic distinction that we need to understand comes from the sociologist M.N. Srinivas. He separated the Varna from the Jati.
This distinction is absolutely foundational. Let's start with the Varna. What is it?
The Varna is what Srinivas called the book view. It's the mythological, pan-Indian, fourfold system that you find in the ancient texts.
Right, so you have Brahmin, the priests and scholars, Kshatriya, warriors and rulers, Vaishya, merchants and farmers, and Shudra, laborers and service providers. It's the ideal philosophical framework, and it's limited to just those 4 broad categories.
And what about Jati?
Jati is the field view. It's the lived reality on the ground. These are the thousands of local, decentralized endogamous groups that are defined rigidly by birth and by a specific occupation.
So Varna is the 4-story ideal building.
Jati is the thousands of real conflicting local hierarchies that are actually built upon it. Jati is what determines your daily interactions, your job prospects, and crucially, your marriage partners.
To really understand the rigidity of the traditional structure, we can turn to the classic work of G.S. Guri. He outlined 6 defining features of the caste system.
And we should explore these in detail because they illustrate the mechanism of societal control.
Okay, so what's the first one?
First is the segmental division of society. Society is broken up into these distinct, watertight compartments where membership is strictly determined by birth. Each segment has its own defined status, its own norms, its own duties.
Which leads to this intense sense of loyalty, but only to one's own segment that we're feeling.
Exactly. The second feature is the social and religious hierarchy. This is the ranking system based on that concept of purity and pollution, placing Brahmins at the mythological top and Shudras at the bottom. It creates a vertical ladder of inherent status.
And third, and this one is perhaps the most complex for an outsider to understand, are the restrictions on feeding and social interaction.
This is governed strictly by those purity and pollution concepts. For instance, there are these very strict rules differentiating kacha food, food cooked with water, which is seen as easily contaminated, and paka food, cooked with ghee, which is considered less susceptible to pollution.
So what does that mean in practice?
It means a Brahmin could not accept kacha food from a lower caste person without risking ritual defilement. And that rule rigidly restricted who you could eat with, who you could socialize with. It's called social commensality.
Then the fourth feature is endogamy.
This is critical. Marriage must be strictly confined to one's own subcaste or gotra. This is the key mechanism that preserves the purity of the lineage and prevents the blurring of caste lines. And it's enforced through very severe social penalties for non-compliance.
Fifth, fixed occupation.
Traditionally, your occupation was hereditary and fixed. You were born into the caste that performed a specific function and that deterred members from pursuing any other kind of work.
And finally, number 6.
Civil and religious disabilities for lower castes. Higher castes enjoyed special privileges and ritual access, while lower castes often faced systemic disadvantages, like being restricted from entering temples, using specific public wells, or even living in certain parts of the village.
These 6 features, taken together, they describe a self-regulating hereditary social machine. It was designed for structural permanence.
It was. And the economic engine of this social machine was the Jajmani system. This regulated the reciprocal relationships within the village economy.
So Jajmani was the Hindu system based on fixed reciprocity. The land-owning high-status castes were the Jajman.
Right. And they exchanged food, gifts, or often a fixed portion of the harvest, for specific services provided by the artisan or landless lower castes, who are known as the Kamen.
This relationship was typically hereditary, and it was essential for the village to function as a self-sufficient unit.
Absolutely. The sources give some specific examples of this exchange. The Brahmin receives payment for presiding over ceremonies. The Sunar, the goldsmith, provides ornaments. The Nai, the barber, performs specific social services like carrying messages and personal hygiene.
And the Kadi, the carpenter, provides and repairs tools.
Right. And payment traditionally included both cash, which was rare, and more importantly, a share of the crop, housing, and occasional gifts.
Now, proponents of the system argued it provided a stable, sustainable safety net for everyone in the village. It ensured no one would starve.
They did. But critics universally point to its feudalistic nature. The Kamen often had little to no leverage. Their services were generally undervalued, and the system perpetuated social inequality, trapping families in debt and hereditary service for generations.
Regardless of the historical assessment, the sources all confirm that the Jajmani system is rapidly declining today.
Yes, it's being driven by massive external forces. We can identify three primary drivers.
The first one is monetization.
The shift to a cash economy is destroying that traditional in-kind payment method. Landless laborers are increasingly demanding a fixed wage, paid in cash. And that pushes them toward competitive global markets and away from that old hereditary village dependence.
Okay, what's a second driver?
The shift from agriculture. Urbanization and emigration driven by globalization. Individuals are seeking work outside the traditional agricultural sphere. When people move to cities, the functional interdependence that anchored the Jajmani system just breaks down entirely.
And the third driver is technology.
Technological access. This is the mechanical disruption. Services that were traditionally performed by the Kamen-like complex irrigation or harvesting are now done by tractors and machines. This dramatically reduces the need for inherited artisan services, and it cuts those ties of dependence.
The decline of Jajmani really confirms that even a system as rigid as caste is dynamic. And this brings us to the crucial discussion of caste mobility and modernization.
To understand change, we first need to define the concept of local power. And for that, we turn back to M.N. Srinavis and his idea of the dominant caste.
Right, so a caste is considered dominant if it possesses three traditional resources, a sizable amount of the locally available arable land,
Significant numerical strength in that region, and it occupies a high place locally in the ritual hierarchy.
But the sources stress that in recent decades, this definition has expanded.
It has. It now includes non-traditional elements of dominance. Significant political and economic power, holding prestigious jobs in government or the corporate sector, and having a high proportion of educated members within the caste group.
Which means that a traditionally low-ranking group, if it becomes politically and economically powerful, can now become the locally dominant caste.
That's a huge shift in how power operates. Now, regarding actual mobility, the primary internal mechanism identified by Srinavis is Sanskritization.
Sanskritization. This is the process where a lower caste group tries to raise its position in the hierarchy by adopting the customs, the rituals, and the ideology of a higher, usually twice-born caste.
Like the Brahmins or Kshatriyas.
Yeah.
An example cited is lower castes in Odisha deliberately emulating the vegetarianism and ritual practices of local Brahmins to claim a higher social standing over multiple generations.
But critics argue that Sanskritization has this built-in limitation.
It does. While it allows individual castes to achieve upward mobility, it doesn't fundamentally challenge the structure of the caste system itself. It merely allows a shift within the hierarchy.
So it functions as a kind of safety valve.
Exactly. It releases internal social pressure without abolishing the structural inequality entirely.
The second major facilitator of mobility is political patronage.
Historically, rulers, whether it's the Mughals or the British, could grant legitimacy to certain caste groups, raising their status. Post-independence, politics became the primary arena for mobility.
So caste groups consolidate their power. They assert themselves through organized political federations to protect their interests during elections.
Precisely. And this political mobilization can lead to groups collectively demanding to be recognized under different higher categories. You see this with lower agricultural castes in Gujarat uniting to be accepted as Kshatriyas. They're mobilizing their numerical strength in the democratic process.
So as we look to the future, the sources present two contrasting viewpoints on the fate of caste.
Yes. One view, buoyed by the forces of industrialization, urbanization, and all the constitutional provisions against untouchability, predicts the degeneration or abolishment of the caste system, that it will just succumb to modernization.
And the opposing view.
The opposing and perhaps more grounded view argues for its persistence and reinstatement. This view suggests that caste hasn't vanished at all. It has merely changed costumes.
It's embedded itself within modern politics.
Yes, where casteism and politics are often inseparable. And it survives through modern caste associations that function as powerful lobbying and identity groups.
The conclusion drawn from the sources seems pretty clear. Caste factors, though legally banned and structurally weaker in urban centers, continue to profoundly mark the psyche and the political landscape of the Indian masses.
It's incredibly resilient.
We've established the complex reality of caste. Now we need to turn our attention to the groups that historically have existed somewhat outside or on the periphery of that main caste structure.
The tribal communities.
Yes, this is part 4, tribal communities, challenges, and change.
These communities, for administrative and constitutional purposes, are classified as scheduled tribes, or STs, by the President of India under Article 366(25).
And they represent a significant portion of the population.
They do. According to the 2011 census, their population was 10.42 crore, which accounts for 8.6% of the overall Indian population.
Now, there is a deep and quite complex debate surrounding the term indigenous people. Many anthropologists and activists refer to tribes as Adivasis.
Which means earliest inhabitants or aboriginals.
But is that claim universally applicable or accepted in international forums?
It's highly contested. The UN Convention defines indigenous people with a specific global context that is, frankly, difficult to apply neatly to India, which has been a melting pot for millennia.
So while many anthropologists argue for the Adivasi status,
some studies suggest that only about 65% of tribes actually claim to be the original non-migrant inhabitants. The ultimate academic conclusion is that definitively establishing global indigenous status in a country with such an ancient history and complex migration patterns is difficult and politically charged.
While that historical debate remains, the current socioeconomic reality is tragically clear. The statistics on deprivation they're damning.
They are. The sources highlight that 43% of scheduled tribes live below the poverty line. That's the highest rate among all social groups in India, including scheduled castes.
And what's more, a staggering 79% of rural ST households are categorized as deprived.
The biggest driver of this deprivation is displacement. It's the loss of their primary resource base. The sources confirm that developmental projects have led to high displacement, with STs being disproportionately affected. They represent nearly 47% of all people displaced by such projects.
And since 1961, the percentage of landless ST cultivators has increased by 25%.
Which leads us to the core issue: land alienation and indebtedness. Land alienation, the illegal, involuntary, or government-mandated loss of tribal land, is the single biggest factor undermining tribal livelihoods.
What are the specific mechanisms driving this alienation beyond just the big infrastructure projects?
Well, there are 3 main mechanisms. First, as you said, development-induced displacement for dams, mines, and industries. Second is eviction for wildlife conservation.
So tribes are removed from protected forest areas to create national parks or tiger reserves.
Exactly. Losing access to their traditional lands and resources.
Yeah.
And third is just rampant encroachment by outsiders, non-tribal people, acquiring tribal land illegally or through exploitative means.
And the consequence of this land loss is massive indebtedness.
The sources trace this cycle all the way back to the colonial period, where exploitative forest policies pushed tribes into overdependence on outside moneylenders.
And that moneylender system, which was often unregulated, it resulted in exorbitant interest rates,
leading to generational debt, loss of rights over land used as collateral, and it often resulted in families being forced into bonded labor to repay obligations that were designed to be perpetual.
The government has introduced major legal countermeasures to try and protect these vulnerable communities. We have to detail the 2 most critical pieces of legislation.
The first one is a landmark piece of law, the Forest Rights Act, 2006, or FRA. This act aims to correct historical injustices by legally recognizing and vesting forest rights to forest dwellers.
The philosophy behind it is groundbreaking. It recognizes that tribes are not illegal encroachers, but are the rightful inhabitants of these forests.
Exactly. And the FRA recognizes 4 specific categories of rights.
What are they?
It recognizes title rights, which is ownership of land cultivated up to a certain date. Use rights, which is the right to collect minor forest produce for grazing, access to traditional resources, relief and development rights for infrastructure, and crucially, management rights.
The right to protect and conserve the forests and wildlife in their traditional areas.
Which is so important because it empowers the community itself.
The second major policy response is the Land Acquisition Act, 2013. This law provides significant safeguards for all displaced people, including STs.
Yes, it stipulates that compensation in rural areas must be 4 times the market value, which provides a much fairer financial deal than previous laws. And critically, it also mandates mandatory consent from the affected population.
How much consent?
For private projects, 80% consent is required before land acquisition can even proceed. This gives the community a voice and some real leverage.
But despite these powerful legal protections, the sources point out significant implementation failures, especially with the FRA.
Yes, the gap between the law and the reality on the ground is wide. There is a huge backlog of claims pending across states, many of which are just deliberately ignored.
And alarmingly, many rejections of these claims are not properly communicated to the claimants,
denying them their legal right to appeal. Furthermore, state authorities are sometimes found to be actively disregarding the decisions of the Gram Sabha, the village council, regarding the claims, which completely undermines the democratic intent of the act.
Let's shift to social change and unrest. The sources note that the relative isolation of tribal societies largely ended during the colonial period, and that led to massive social friction.
This contact brought 3 main external influences. First, the influx of Hindu outsiders who were often seeking economic opportunity, and in the process, they introduced caste concepts.
And some tribes adopted these concepts and began moving toward the caste end of what's called the tribe-caste continuum through Sanskritization to gain a higher social status.
Right. The second influence was Christian missionaries. They arrived focusing heavily on education, healthcare, and welfare. This influence often led to cultural changes and sometimes resistance to traditional tribal practices.
And the third influence?
The colonial forest policies themselves, which treated forests purely as commercial resources, often forcing tribes out of their traditional habitats.
This combination of exploitation, alienation from land, and a pervasive sense of unfair treatment by outsiders and the government, this became the central source of unrest.
And it led to various movements. The history of tribal movements shows several different goals. You had early ethnic rebellions, violent resistance against economic exploitation, like the famous Cole, Santhal, and Birsa Munda revolts.
Later, you saw reform movements.
Yes, which were nonviolent efforts aimed at achieving a higher social standing by adopting upper caste rituals, trying to negotiate their place within the broader society.
Then came political autonomy movements,
asserting a distinct self-identity and demanding separate administrative units, like the protracted struggle for the creation of the Jharkhand state.
And finally, the most extreme, secessionist movements,
seeking complete separation from India. The most notable example being the Naga secessionist movement in the Northeast.
As a final point on culture, the sources highlight a really profound cultural loss, the decline of the traditional youth dormitories.
Yes, these institutions, like the go-to of the Muriya Gans, they served as the centers of village life.
Can you explain the function of these dormitories? They were far more than just sleeping quarters.
Oh, absolutely. They were the traditional schooling and socialization system. They taught the youth self-independence, cooperation, cultural knowledge, morality, and all the skills necessary for marriage and adulthood. They were vital for transmitting culture from one generation to the next without formal schooling.
But the sources confirm that these have now largely been abandoned.
They have. They've been dismantled due to the combined pressures of, 1, Christian influence, which often viewed them as morally problematic, and 2, the pressures of modernization, which offered alternative formal education structures. Their decline represents the abandonment of a vital mechanism for preserving unique tribal culture and communal values among the youth.
We've moved from philosophy and foundational structures to the severe challenges facing marginalized groups. Now in our final section, Part 5, we're going to tackle the driving engine of all this change.
The mechanisms of sociocultural change, the forces that tear down, adapt, or reinforce the systems we've just discussed.
To understand change, we have to start by clearly distinguishing 2 terms that often get blurred: Westernization and modernization.
M.N. Srinivas defined Westernization as the profound changes brought about by over 150 years of British rule changes in technology, institutions, and ideology.
And Westernization is defined as a value-loaded concept. It implies that the culture or institutions being adopted, whether it's parliamentary democracy, cricket, or industrial technology, are often perceived, implicitly or explicitly, as superior to the indigenous culture.
Right. Modernization, however, is ideally value neutral. It's defined by thinkers like Daniel Lerner as the technical process of societal transformation as a society industrializes and becomes rationalized.
And Lerner identified 5 key interrelated components of this process. Let's elaborate on those 5.
Okay. First, technological changes driven by science and the use of modern energy. Second, economic changes, which involve increased occupational mobility and consumerism. Third, political changes, focusing on greater public participation and the assertion of rights.
And
Fourth, social changes, characterized by increased literacy rates and urbanization. And finally, fifth, psychological changes, which involve the adoption of rationalism and a cosmopolitan, outward-looking perspective.
Now, Srinivas saw all 3 processes, Sanskritization, Westernization, and modernization, happening simultaneously in post-independence India.
And this is the source of tremendous social friction, isn't it?
It has to be.
Absolutely. The insight here is that Indian society is simultaneously attempting to become technically modern, rationalized and industrialized, culturally westernized, adopting foreign institutions, and internally mobile through Sanskritization. This simultaneous, often contradictory mixing of mechanisms results in immense social tension and nonlinear change.
This complexity is captured perfectly by the concept of the interplay of traditions, little and great.
Right. This framework suggests that Indian civilization is an endogamous or a sort of closed structure where local regional traditions are always in continuous interaction with the high overarching traditions.
So let's define the 2 poles, great traditions.
These are elite, reflective, and codified. They're carried through sacred texts like the Vedas, the Shastras, and formalized Vedic rituals. They aim for universality and standardization across the whole subcontinent.
In contrast, you have the little traditions,
Which are folk and local. They're unlettered, they're localized, highly specialized, and expressive. So you think of regional seasonal festivals, specific local deities, or village-level rituals that might only be understood in one small geographic area.
The crucial observation is the 2-way movement of cultural elements between these 2 poles.
Yes. The first movement is universalization. This is the process where an element from a local little tradition is carried upward and incorporated into the texts or the formalized practices of the great tradition.
Can you give us a clear example of that kind of cultural promotion?
A classic example is the Sarti Puja. It's a local rite performed by a village group that slowly gains legitimacy and is eventually incorporated and standardized into the broader pan-Indian form of Lakshmi Puja. The local ritual gains universal acceptance and textual justification.
And the reverse process is parochialization.
This is when elements of the great tradition move downward, becoming localized and changing their form to suit the customs, the language, and the folk practices of a specific local culture.
An excellent illustration of that is Govardhan Puja.
Exactly. The great tradition is the philosophical worship of the deity Govardhan, mentioned in key texts. However, at the local level, this highly abstract concept is parochialized into the physical folk worship of cow dung.
Which is also called Govardhan Puja.
Yes, and it's highly relevant to local agricultural and animal husbandry realities. The core religious idea moves down and adopts a local, tangible form.
This continual exchange ensures that Indian civilization remains structurally enduring while constantly absorbing local variation. It explains how such deep diversity can be contained within a single civilization.
Finally, we have to look at the immediate post-independence mechanisms of change that were facilitated by the state, the role of governance and media in change.
The most profound structural change imposed by the state is decentralization through the Panchayati Raj system.
This 3-tier structure of local self-governance was formalized by the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments in 1992.
And the impact of the system has been revolutionary, especially for marginalized sections.
It has. By mandating reservations for women, Dalits, scheduled castes, and tribal leaders, the system has drastically increased participation in local decision-making right at the grassroots level.
It has forced marginalized individuals into leadership roles, giving them the authority and the platform to assert themselves politically.
And in doing so, they often challenge the traditional dominance of the high castes or feudal landowners who previously monopolized local governance. This is genuine structural mobility achieved through legal fiat.
And this structural change is amplified by the power of media and social change.
Right. Media, which encompasses traditional print, audiovisual, and modern social media, acts as this collective force for mass communication, and it plays a complex dual role.
On the positive side, media generates massive public awareness of policy, of government actions, and social issues like gender inequality or caste oppression.
It helps the public form informed opinions, provides a platform for crucial social debate, and it can influence lifestyles toward greater cosmopolitanism.
But conversely, the negative impacts are severe.
They are. Media is a major source of social unrest due to the rapid spread of fake news and malicious information, which can incite violence. It can distort elections through paid or fabricated news stories. It leads to the sensationalization of critical issues, and it's often misused by political leaders or powerful groups to force specific ideologies onto the population.
The ultimate challenge for contemporary Indian governance, as we conclude, is balancing the necessity of a free media with the need for ethical regulation.
Ensuring that the media maximizes the positive benefits of participation and awareness while minimizing the disruption caused by misinformation and ideological manipulation.
We have completed a really comprehensive journey through these sources. We started with the sheer scale of linguistic diversity and the failure of those historical racial classifications, and we've ended with the immense forces that are currently reshaping the social landscape.
The insights gained are pretty profound. We established that the philosophical core of Indian life, the Purushartha, is undergoing this demographic shift. The householder stage, Grihastha, now dominates everything, which refocuses society toward the pursuit of wealth, artha, and desire, kama.
And this philosophical reality plays out in the complex social architecture of the caste system. It forces us to distinguish between the 4 mythological varnas and the thousands of lived local jates.
And the decline of the Jajmani system, driven by cash and technology, marks a profound shift in that old village interdependence.
And yet what we found is that caste has shown this immense adaptability. It survived modernization through things like Sanskritization and, crucially, by embedding itself in democratic politics.
Which confirms the system is dynamic, but it's far from dead.
Our deep dive into the scheduled tribes highlighted the critical importance of effective policy implementation. Despite landmark legislation like the Forest Rights Act and the Land Acquisition Act, the devastating issues of land alienation and debt continue to marginalize these communities.
It underlines the urgent need for constitutional safeguards to truly deliver their intended protection.
The core lesson from all these mechanisms of change, Sanskritization, political consolidation, the interplay of great and little traditions, is that the Indian social system is a masterclass in simultaneous adaptation.
It absorbs external change, like westernization and modernization, while constantly referencing and maintaining its own internal philosophical anchors. The future really relies on how successfully these progressive political mechanisms, like the Panchayat Raj system, can empower the most vulnerable to claim their place within this evolving tapestry.
And as we leave you with one final thought, let's revisit that ancient concept of social obligation. Rina, the universal debt we are born with. We specifically discussed Pitarina, the debt to ancestors and lineage, which was traditionally repaid by having children and maintaining family rituals. In a modern, highly individualized, hyper-consumerist society where Artha reigns supreme, what responsibility do we carry for the historical injustices, the resource depletion, and the climate crisis that we've inherited from past generations? What long-forgotten concept, like the moral debt to our ancestors, might unexpectedly gain vital relevance as we realize that the debts of the past are now being collected in the present?